A new historical Total War is an exciting prospect for the franchise. As a Warhammer fan, I've been well catered for with Total War, Warhammer 1, 2 and 3, but for those virtual generals among us who prefer history books over the Games Workshop's Black Library, the pickings have been much more slim and mostly in the form of Total War's Sagas. After a demo of some of the new elements coming to the campaign, as well as a few hours hands-on with some battles, it feels as though with Total War Pharaoh, creative Assembly Sofia is firing on all cylinders with the feature experimentation and development that we have come to expect with new historical titles, while also aiming to deliver a much deeper, fleshed out Total War experience. I felt as though the setting of the 1200 BCE New Kingdom period of ancient Egypt in the late Bronze Age was an interesting one, as broadly speaking, Total War is double dipping into this period of history, with 2020's Total War Saga Troy taking place in the same century. While some of that Troy DNA is visible and the time period feels a little like treading familiar ground, Total War Pharaoh is a different beast entirely. Pharaoh aims to showcase the most extensive empire in Egyptian history, mixing the beauty of the setting with the brutality of the Bronze Age. With this combination poised to deliver new gameplay and mechanics, while also exploring this period in depths previously unseen in the franchise. From a campaign perspective, the issue at hand for the armchair Pharaoh will be the late Bronze Age collapse, a historically devastating period of time that was culturally disruptive, violent, and led to the economic downfall of many regions. It's this event that you as ruler will eventually need to delay, battle against, or weather the storm to see what awaits you on the other side.
Never back down!
The pantheon of Egyptian gods is of course a key element of ancient Egypt that goes hand in hand with its history. I was curious if there would be any of the history behind the myth that we saw in Troy, but during an interview with game director Todor Nikolov, he made it clear that while the gods are an element in the game that can affect gameplay, Total War Pharaoh is a much more grounded, authentic game than Troy, so we won't be seeing any mythical beasts on the battlefield. From what I saw, it feels as though authenticity and immersion are key to Creative Assembly Sofia's vision of Pharaoh. And while some liberties have been taken with historical accuracy, either due to gameplay considerations or simply missing historical records, those considerations and liberties are being balanced in a way that can also broaden player choice. But it's not just Egyptian rulers that make up the roster of Bronze Age leaders, with 8 leaders hailing from 3 different cultures: the Egyptians, Canaanites, or Hittites, all with their own unique traits, units, identities, and varied faction leaders. While Egyptians may favour lightly armoured units utilising chariots and archers with hit-and-run tactics, the Hittites are experts in metallurgy and can field slower but more robust armoured units, while the Canaanites are a uniquely flexible combination of Hittite and Egyptian cultures favouring stealth tactics and adaptable troops. Unit choice and variety was surprisingly in-depth, and while the battles I played were pre-made, I was left feeling that army composition is an even more impactful consideration than it was in previous games, with many of the new gameplay elements that Pharaoh introduces making your choice of an army all that more impactful. First among these is the new dynamic weather system. Battles can take place across 3 main geographical areas, all of which can dictate the terrain and potentially the changing weather considerations in battle. Skirmishes in deserts may fall victim to violent sandstorms that chip slowly away at unit health while adding extreme penalties to your archer's range and accuracy. Thunderstorms may result in the landscape becoming muddy and slowing your units, with the clap of thunder seen as an omen from the gods and reducing morale, as well as extreme heat that will sap units of their stamina, prevent fatigue recovery, and dry out the surrounding flora, increasing the risk of fires spreading throughout the battle as embers are carried on the wind. As the weather system is dynamic, the considerations of a map's terrain and your units are more vital than ever. Warming, sunny weather can dry up a muddy creek, opening up a potential flank. A piece of high ground can be made useless with a blinding sandstorm, or if rain is forecast, you can use lightly armoured units to your advantage and further sap the speed and energy from slower armoured foes as you force them to wade through a bog, with the troops often reacting accordingly to their changing environment.
The gods cloud our vision!
All of the battles that I played during my hands-on used this weather system in one way or another, with one sticking in my memory as especially satisfying. I was defending my capital city of Mennefer, that's modern-day Memphis, not the one in Tennessee, from a siege during sweltering heat. While all the units were being sapped of energy as the sun beat down on them, the fact that my army wasn't having to push battering rams or siege towers increased my advantage. But not only that, they were having to push said engines through patches of dry grass, an element I was able to take advantage of with my archers loosing fire arrows. Later in the battle, I retreated further into the city to make use of the bottlenecks of the streets. My enemy used parks and open areas still filled with trees and bushes in order to chase my troops, but that greenery was also similarly engulfed in flame, taking the inhabitants with it or simply cutting off an avenue of movement to the enemy. It was only when I saw the fires had spread to my own buildings that I realised I wasn't quite the Master General that I thought. While units have familiar abilities such as shielded fighters forming a wall, they also have new stances that go hand in hand with utilizing the map's terrain as well as their size and weight. Troops can now advance and slowly push a line forward, hold position and maintain their formation as well as the ground they are on, or use the give ground stance to allow your units to slowly backstep away while still facing the enemy and remaining in combat, so they may slowly fall back without suffering the additional damage that always came with manually moving your units and being shot, stabbed or slashed in the back. Your leaders' units and their bodyguards have always been some of the most powerful and pivotal units in Total War games. Pharaoh is building on this element, allowing for more unit flexibility. These bodyguard units will follow their leader both into battle, but will also mirror their discipline. Equipping your Pharaoh with a bow and a chariot will change the unit as a whole to one of chariot archers, or if you wish your leader to take to the front lines, you can equip them with a sword, shield, and heavier armor, and the troops that march alongside them will follow suit. Talking once more with game director Todor Nikolov, he said that while there is some evidence of Pharaohs being trained in multiple disciplines, this was mostly another element to further player choice and flexibility. While we've had some control over our leaders and generals in previous games, it has never been to this depth, which offers another interesting layer of flexibility when it comes to how players are able to prepare for a battle if they want an extra unit of archers for an upcoming siege, or a hit and run chariot unit if the approaching enemy is the slow armored sort. That armor is also a more in-depth consideration, as it can now degrade as a battle progresses and a unit takes damage. While I played a few battles during the preview, it took some time before I could get my head around the impact this had, but it certainly meant I had to be smarter with my armored units, while also meaning I was able to better wear down the enemy using lower ranked troops equipped with hammers and maces. It could potentially be a small change, but I think every veteran of Total War can remember one time or another where a particularly stubborn squad of heavy infantry became an immovable nuisance on the battlefield, something that will hopefully be less prevalent here. One element in army composition returning generals may face is the lack of cavalry, as in this time period there were no traditional cavalry units. Instead, chariots have been tweaked to make them more diverse in their function and utility than they were in previous titles. Altogether, both reworked elements and new gameplay have really slowed the pace of battles, but so far, I think it's for the better. A slower pace means that micromanagement is less important, especially when it comes to the precise use of time, skills, and abilities. I was told that this was supposed to feel like a classic Total War experience, while also being simpler, more natural, and delivering battles that feel authentic. I was left wondering if this element could be a dividing one within the community, or those who have come exclusively from the Warhammer titles would respond. But for me, so far, I think this is how historical titles should feel. Sound tactical decisions feel more impactful, while a strategic slip-up doesn't feel so devastating. Reacting to the dynamic weather during battle and twisting it to your advantage feels rewarding, and the idea of having to plan around the elements themselves in the campaign layer is both exciting and daunting. But it does mean that the game has more tools in its arsenal to ensure that skirmishes remain varied and engaging. I really do feel those elements of engagement and immersion too, as the game creates more opportunities for you to tap into your strategic thinking, with more elements like troop type, weather, armor, and fatigue to consider. And the game looking gorgeous certainly helps in that immersion factor. The landscapes of the battle maps look incredible, with sand dunes looking appropriately arid, riverbanks offering pleasant strokes of green against the desert, or rocky crags all reacting to the ever-changing light and colors that come with the game's weather system. All of this space is host to some of the most detailed units to have featured in a historical Total War title, and since all the troops, not just your heroes, have matched combat animations where individuals can meet blade to blade or deliver a killing blow, it was hard at times to take my eyes off of the landscape and combat and instead focus on winning the battle. There's much more of the game to see, with my hands-on being confined to a few battles rather than any turns in the campaign, but from everything I've seen so far, my excitement for a new historical Total War has only been accelerated by my time with the Pharaohs. If you enjoyed this preview, be sure to share your thoughts in the comment section below, and of course, be sure to subscribe for GameSpot so you don't miss any future coverage of Total War Pharaohs.